The afternoon session of our joint committee on public safety. For those of you who weren't here this morning, we're doing things a little bit different this year than in past years. Before, we've done joint committees on the major big sessions over in the Capitol, and then we've broken out into the individual Senate and House committees to actually hear from the agencies and get down into the weeds. But this year, because of the schedule change, we are have had abbreviated big joint committee meetings, and now we're breaking out into joint committee meetings to get down into the weeds. And so, but we're doing just the 14. Some of the agencies that have very little change between 14 and 15, we're hearing both of them at the same time. But on other agencies, corrections being one, we will just deal with the 14 amended, and then we'll come back when we talk about the 15, because those are a lot different issues. But in a lot of our, like courts, we had maybe one difference or two differences, and so there was no point in asking those agencies to come back, so we've dealt with both at the same time. This afternoon we will have, joining the House Public Safety Committee, we will have the Criminal Justice Committee of the Senate with Senator Crosby as chair, and he is going to be co-chairing this meeting with me, and we will hear from Corrections and Pardons and Paroles. And then we will be, the Public Safety Committee of the House will be meeting with the Public Safety Committee of the Senate, which will be Senator Buddy Carter as chair of that, and then we will finish up about 3 o'clock this afternoon, hopefully. So we will start out with corrections, and we are only dealing with the 14 amended. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. And if y'all will make sure that you speak into the mic. We had some complaints this morning that some of the folks listening over the broadband could not hear.
Yes, sir. Are we on?
Yes, sir.
Mic's on. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committees. We're going to be brief today, as you said, Mr. Chairman. We really only have one change in our budget, and our budget is on page 83 of your document there, and I'll give you just a second to get to it.
Mr. Commissioner, before you get started, we are looking at hopefully a success of the criminal justice reform recommendations adopted by the House and the Senate a couple of years ago, and that's why we're seeing these changes in your budget.
Sir. Yes, sir, absolutely. I'm glad you pointed that out. The only change the governor's recommended to our budget is in the line item you see there in the program, the county jail subsidy, and what we would like to do is move $5 million of that county jail subsidy, and the subsidy is what we reimburse our sheriffs for holding state inmates, which is what the chairman was alluding to. Move $5 million of that to cover two unappropriated expenses that we have. One is to cover our GETS agreement. We're a little short there, and the other one is to cover $4 million worth of the state health benefit plan. So it's simply moving $5 million that we're not going to spend this year to cover two other areas where we do need some financial help. And so that's our only change.
Well, since you're talking about jail subsidies, tell us how all this came about.
As you pointed out several years ago, I think 3 years ago, the governor and a certain gentleman behind me there, I won't call his name, but he used to sit on this committee with you, sitting right in front of you there, Mr. Chairman, got together and passed some legislation to make small changes to the adult criminal justice system. But we know that making small changes in a big system can have an enormous impact. For example, in 2009, Georgia had 64,000 adult inmates under sentence. 64,000 means they're in the state prison system or in the county jails. As of Monday morning, Georgia had 57,100 inmates under sentence. That is an incredible drop of almost 7,000 inmates. At the time, we had 5,000 inmates waiting in the county jail. Today, we have fewer than 500. And our county jails have 10,000 empty beds. 10,000 empty beds. And the full force of criminal justice reform has not yet kicked in. It will take several years for the full effect to kick into the system. So we're very, I think, smartly, great legislation. As the governor pointed out in his State of the State speech, it was unanimous votes, both chambers, both years, and I think we'll continue to reap the benefits. Now, when we come back on the 15 budget, Chairman, we talked last year at joint appropriations that that's good because we're keeping Georgia safe. We're locking the right ones up. We're locking up the violent ones, the predators, the sex offenders, and they're going to stay a long time. But through your individual work last year on appropriations, you earmarked $750,000 to try and experiment in our rural counties. So we actually have mental health resources and substance abuse resources in 11 rural judicial circuits. We have those resources in 15 urban circuits. And with the accountability courts kicking in, what we're finding is that those people who are truly addicted, but not dangerous necessarily, who are truly mentally ill, but not dangerous necessarily, are going through these accountability courts and coming to drug treatment facilities and dual diagnosis facilities. And 4 years ago, we had 21,000 people enter your prison system. 3 years ago, we had 20. 2 years ago, we had 19. This year, we had 18.5. So the admissions are coming down. But keep in mind, I said the violent sex offenders are coming into the system. So what we need to do is prepare for a tougher population. We've gone from 57% violent sex in Georgia 5 years ago to 64% violent sex. And that percentage will continue to go up as a percent of the population. So when you see our 15 bond package, you'll see some significant dollars in there, so we can make sure we can keep the doors locked, keep the fences locked, and keep the cameras on.
Yeah.
That's been a great success so far.
And going back specifically to the jail subsidy, you had $9 million that was in the budget.
Yes, sir.
And you're taking $5 million of that out.
Yes, sir.
And reducing that to $4 million. But the total impact of that is that in the last 2 or 3 years, $9 million was a wish target. It's actually been closer to 12 or 14 million.
You're correct. Over the last 10 fiscal years, the state has paid our county sheriffs $170 million over 10 years to hold state inmates. The previous 2 fiscal years, 11 and 12 or 12 and 13, it was 11 and 12. Fiscal year 11 and 12, we were appropriated $9.3 million for the jail subsidy. We actually spent $25 million each year for the jail subsidy. So we had to find $32 million within to cover that deficit.
So when we're doing 4, it's not really a $5 million reduction. It's almost a $20 million reduction.
Yes, sir, absolutely, in real dollars.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner.
Yes, sir.
Questions of the Commissioner? Now, when we get to the 15, we will have a lot of other issues to deal with, but these are the only realignment of taking that $5 million out and then spreading it around. And Chairman Crosby.
Well, I don't have a question, but I do want to make a comment. What y'all have done is amazing for Georgia and the people of Georgia, and I want to commend the chairman for his vision and leadership in this direction. I just encourage you to keep up the good work and the hard work, and the results will get better, I'm sure. But thank you for all you've done.
Yes, sir.
Anybody else? Well, thank you, Mr. Commissioner. You have put us way ahead of schedule.
That's my intent, sir.
Pardons and paroles. Mr. Commissioner.
I'll chair this. Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'm Michael Nell, Executive Director of Parole, and this is Lisa Reed, our Budget Director. I'll certainly take advantage of the Commissioner getting ahead of schedule, but not that much. I just wanted to share some good news we were able to do this past year as a result of you supporting us. Our cost avoidance to corrections came in at about $57 million. You heard the chairman talk about the jail subsidy.
Excuse me just a minute. What page are we on?
I'm sorry. Forgive me there.
No problem.
Senator Crosby, Mr. Chair, it's 145.
Okay, 145. Thank you. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And this will lead up to it. Actually, there's only one small change to our budget, and that's elimination of $100,000. You'll see there. The recommended change, it's under clemency decisions, and we're going to be able to manage and deal with that, but there's a good news story behind that change, and as I was sharing, we increased our cost avoidance to corrections by $57 million last year, about 16.4%. We were able to do that by greater efficiencies and effectiveness in our release process and our clemency decisions. 3 years ago, we were supported to implement CONS, our clemency online navigation. We're now completely up and running with that. All of our files are electronic. That helps the board to perform their job in a more efficient and effective manner. Our parole success completions had an increase of 2.8%, 74%. That in and of itself is well above the national average by almost 24%. Our revocations to prison were actually down by 16%. So you can see it can add up. We sent 419 parolees back to prison less than we did the preceding year. So that results in savings for corrections. Our average caseload is going up, but that too is being addressed through specialized supervision and our technology efforts. Our population, cumulatively, you heard the commissioner talk about the standing population. Since 2007, it's probably represented the largest that parole has ever been represented by way of inmate and parole population. And as a result, with caseloads increasing, our cost of supervision naturally will go down, and we've reduced that by about 8.7%. We've been in our first year of our virtual office. It has actually exceeded our expectations by going virtual. A byproduct was a savings of $1.5 million. But the real initiative was that our contacts with parolees in the field by way of home contacts and employment contacts have doubled. Our time being spent with the parolee as well as those family members and employers has almost doubled as well. So naturally, that's going to lend a greater quality base of supervision. So I wanted to share that. Also, we were continuing with our IT initiatives. Our IT initiatives were big with the virtual offices and allowed us to do that, but we've now implemented a portal, IT portal. It helps us take our case management system and cons into one system that helps us do our job much more effective. So that's been very, very positive for us. And that too will take us off of our old Lotus notes. And the good news is, as the commissioner talked about, looking at numbers, those that are releasing, those that are coming into the system is now real time. There's not a 30-day lag there, which helps us to manage our system much better in concert with corrections. So I did want to share that good news story with you. Again, the only item in Amended is a reduction of $100,000 in clemency, and that was originally designated for that implementation of cons and startup, which has been very, very successful.
Tell us what exactly is the virtual office you referred to?
Yes, sir. Virtual office is something we've embarked on almost 2 years ago, and ironically, Senator Crosby, it was not to save money. It was to do our job better. We would go out and visit offices. We had a footprint of about 60 offices, even more than that at the time. And we would go out and visit offices, and the parole officers wouldn't be in them. They'd be out in the field supervising parolees, and that's exactly where they needed to be. So the question was raised, why are we paying for all of this office space? And to date, we only have 12 offices throughout the state. 6 are in lease space because it would be cost prohibitive for us to get out, and 6 are in shared space with Department of Corrections. But now officers, quite candidly, they do the work from their car. We have 2 officers that share a car. They have the mobile equipment and technology needed, and it's proven to be very, very successful. Where, in fact, I would submit to you that we're probably leading the nation in that venture. We've been called to several other states to go and share virtual offices among paroling authorities.
Well, I want to congratulate y'all also on the fine work that y'all have done, and I'm going to have the chairman turn it back over to the chairman here. And
all right, are there questions? Anything other than the $100,000 that also shows up in the 15?
No, sir.
Okay, so the 100,000 is a global change all the way across, and there aren't any other changes either in the 14 amended or the 15.
Other than the statewide changes.
Yeah, just
Correct.
Right, but correct.
All right, now I have a question that I would just maybe think about, get me some information back, because a lot of what we hear, you know, we get out in the state and we talk to folks, and some folks may tell us stuff that they may not tell you.
Yes, sir.
And so it's anecdotal, but it might not be systemic or systematic. But one thing that I have heard, and knowing that your virtual office is a great concept and it's obviously very successful and is producing efficiencies and greater supervision, which is what it's all about. But the thing that I'm hearing is that it started out as a pilot project, that it was very successful as a pilot project, and so it was immediately implemented. And so it was not like implemented a budget year or 2 budget years later. It was like rolled out pretty quick. And that as a result, that since we were in the recession at the same time, it was basically chewing gum and baling wire and, you know, do what you can, where you can,
Yes,
when
sir.
you can. And so some of the things I'm hearing is that we've got old cars, we're dumpster diving for used state patrol equipment as far as mounts for computers in our cars because they're upgrading theirs, and so we're collecting some of their old stuff because we don't have the money to do it. And
No, sir, Chairman Powell, I'll share with you, number one, we don't have mounted computers in our cars. Our computers are of a portable nature. Much of the work they can do is off of their Android phone, but we do have laptops. They are not mounted. I will share with you that when we started this, and I would ask that we remain cognizant that it was a 3-year plan compressed down to 1 year to help us meet our budget cut. It really came down to sending folks home or compressing this plan down to a year from 3 years. Was it ideal? No. I will say that our field did a wonderful job in doing that. It was not just us alone. It was also other law enforcement agencies and entities and community providers. Back to your point about the vehicles, State Patrol was very gracious. We initially, to make this happen, we did not have the full complement of vehicles. We were allowed and authorized to buy 16 vehicles from them. These vehicles were in relatively good shape, and it simply carried us over until a bond package could be approved where we could purchase the new vehicles. So there was a short time frame in there, probably a little bit of growing pain, certainly understand that. But actually, that purchase of those 16 vehicles was extremely beneficial to us and helped us actually get to where we are today.
But we are getting to where we need to be.
Yes, sir, we are. There's no doubt about that.
Okay. Any other questions? Well, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead and get started.
Yeah, let's do.
And Senator Carter and I will be co-chairing this session. So jump in anytime you want to. And your microphone is on perpetually. And we're going to start off with the Department of Defense. And because there are so many or so few changes between the 14 amended and the 15, we are going to deal with both of your budgets at the same time, if you don't mind. So go ahead and, if you will, introduce yourself, and your microphone should be on.
Is it on?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. The Adjutant General sends his regrets. Today he is down at Fort Benning, not the least of which of things he is doing at Fort Benning is making sure those heroes that are coming back home off of deployment actually have jobs, and so he's working very closely with some partners down there, including corrections on making sure those men and women have jobs when they come back home. The Deputy Adjutant General is also deployed, if you will, on something important for him, so he couldn't be here, Mr. Russell Carlson. So you get me. I'm Kenley Finlayson, State Finance Director, and the person that makes all the wheels go is Ms. Pat Graham, the Budget Director. And so we're here to present to you our budget recommendation from the Governor's Office for amended 14 and 15 as well. We're found on the amended budget, we're found on page 88. I did prepare a presentation that hopefully you guys have in front of you. We won't break the trend. We'll try to move fairly quickly as well. The first, and it was just informational slides, and if you, and I guess subject to your questions, the two slides, the first one shows you for the $9.1 million that you all have appropriated in this current year, it shows you where we spend those dollars by sub-program. I mean, you can see how those funds break out. The majority of our state funds, as you know, go to the Youth Challenge program, but you see how those funds break down into the different sub-programs related to, obviously, Air Guard, Army Guard, the administration, military administration, those types of sub-programs. The next pie you don't have any questions, I'll move to the next one. The next pie chart, the only point here is to show you that we're not just a $9.1 million organization. We're a nearly $92 million organization when you pull in the federal funds. Obviously, the federal government has a lot of buy-in to our department, and so that just shows you how we grow when you bring in the federal support for our organization. Then we get to the heart of the matter, which is our changes for the amended budget, and we have, in the amended budget, we have two changes. The first of which is found in the administration program, and it is an increase in state funds for a legal counsel position. I don't know if many of you all might be familiar with Colonel Joe Ferrero. He is that guy, and he came on board way back when under General Nesbitt. He was at Office of Homeland Security with General Nesbitt, not to get too personal about it, but anyway, he's come to the department as an executive counsel. Then he went on active duty with the Air Guard, and he has come back off of active duty as of June 1 of last fiscal year. We brought him on board, and so we need the funding for that position, and that $180,000 represents his salary and fringe benefits for that position. No operating cost, his travel, et cetera, and operating costs for him. We'll take care of that inside our current budget, but we would appreciate if you'd support the governor's recommendation relative to his salary and fringe benefit costs.
Okay, we have a couple of questions. Representative or Chairman Weldon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colonel Ferrero, you want to hire him as legal counsel for the Department of Defense. I guess I don't understand why you wouldn't use the Department of Law.
We will always use the Department of Law where required, and not the least of which is obviously Colonel Ferrero. Joe Ferrero, as we refer to him now because he's retired from the Air Guard, is if we ever find ourselves in court, obviously the Department of Law is the only agency that can represent us in court. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of many minor details that go on inside of an agency, not the least of which open records requests, DOAS contract issues, anything that the Adjutant General or any of the other leadership inside the department on stateside issues need guidance on. He provides that immediate guidance for that leadership. The Department of Law is always there and obviously will always work with us on legal issues, but there are way too many times when the TAG needs an immediate response for a state issue. The JAG office is always there on the federal / military side of the house, but it's important to have that state centric legal mind in the department for our reference.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, and can I comment on that? Well, I appreciate your response to that and certainly understand it. Keep in mind that one of the reasons why we go through this budget process, if we have the ability to use another office that's already existing, we don't want to have to duplicate it. So there are some who are going to look at that as being a duplication.
I can appreciate your perspective on that, yes, sir.
Okay.
All right, Representative Terry 23 Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just as a matter of quick clarification, this $180,000 is salary and benefits only. It's not for an additional person to help him as like administrative assistant or anything?
No, sir. That's wholly his salary and benefits. And keep in mind, benefits costs are over 50% on state-funded positions.
Over 50%?
52 and change is what it cost us to hire. And so $100,000 employee cost you $152,000.
And I've heard every department today needs a lawyer and just run the gamut. Okay. I just wanted to clarify that the number does not include any administrative.
No, sir. It includes nothing but his salary and the cost of us having that position. No travel budget, no operating budget, pens, paper, et cetera. No rent, just his salary and benefits.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was listening to the chairman and also to the gentleman number 23. And I'm a little confused too, because I've heard so many figures today, but you're the first figure that I've heard that benefits are up to 52%. We've had appeals courts said they can do it for 80. The Supreme Court's around 110 or so, and you just came in at 150.
Well, don't forget the Attorney General's doing it for
Attorney General's
50.
here, and he went in at 50. He came in at 50. We've had the gamut. And what I'm concerned about is, but you're the only one that have come, and this observation from distinguished chairman from the Senate is that you come with the law office available, JAG available, and you still need a lawyer. There's a lot of legal stuff going on at defense. That's heavy. I'm just wondering we've got a little extra now, and it's been tough. But I haven't clearly seen where we need 3 different sets of lawyers for you. Maybe if you help me some, I'd be able to get there, but I'm not there yet.
Yes, sir. And a couple of things. One is I can't speak to the other agencies as to the level of expertise and experience the lawyers they are hiring might be at. I would suggest to you that we've hired somebody, Colonel Ferrero, who has years of experience in the legal field and in state government. He's the former corrections commissioner. He's been he's worked in the Attorney General's office, so he comes to us with a lot of experience and the ability to handle the unique issues that are happening at defense. So that might suggest to you why his salary is commensurate with what we think his experience is.
Just a little follow-up, Mr. Chairman. I can appreciate that, but this morning we had Supreme Court Justice talking about the complexities of new cases. Pretty complex, None of us had heard much about derivatives until Madoff. And they're handling stuff like that. and now, so I don't know how much more complex it's going to get than what the Supreme Court's having to see. Just an observation.
Thanks, sir.
Chairman Powell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got to get my breath. Brother Williams over there starting to sound like a fiscal conservative. I'm just wondering if the next step I'm going to be able to introduce him to the Republican caucus.
You
And I appreciate, as I was sitting there, I was looking at the 180,000. It did sort of take me back to the dollar amount we're talking about. And I remember Joe from days over at Corrections back years ago. Quite frankly, he was probably the most ethical person over at Corrections at that time. And so I'm very familiar with Colonel Ferrero. But refresh my memory, is he not a retired state employee?
No, sir.
So he didn't have enough years to retire?
No, sir. He retired from the Air Guard. So he came out of uniform, and he wears suit and tie like me every day.
So when he was at Corrections, he did not get a regular state pension?
No, sir. And forgive me, Mr. Chairman, I didn't mean for this to be personal about a specific individual, but unfortunately I threw it out there, so my apologies. No, sir, he did not retire as a state employee.
So did he use that time with Corrections to move over to his military retirement?
I am not intimately familiar with retirement statutes, but I would assume that you could not use state time to translate to military time for retirement, but I wouldn't want to be held to that.
I'm not sure. I can't remember if Joe was classified as National Guard, Department of Defense, or Army Reserve, Air Force Reserve.
He retired as an an Air Guard officer.
But the bottom line, we're looking at the salary schedule here at $120,000.
Roughly,
and the other
yes, sir.
60 is the add-ons for that.
Yes, sir. Correct.
And we're thinking this will be a full-time legal position.
It's been full-time since June 1. And trust me, he stays busy.
So y'all are asking us to agree to this after the fact?
Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm.
Sure this isn't the Board of sure y'all aren't the Department of Corrections?
All right, I have 3 questions and or comments. Number one, I think Chairman Powell cleared that up. Y'all have already hired this individual?
Correct, sir.
And is he just working for free, hoping that we allocate money for this position?
He's certainly not working for free.
So where is the money coming from? And if you've got enough money to pay him now, why do we have to come up with some more?
If this money is not appropriated, then we will have to make serious reductions in order to accommodate the expenses that have or will occur relative to this position. So
But where's the money come from so far?
spending. Well, it's coming out of the cash, the $9.1 million that's already appropriated for the Department of Defense. We're prospectively spending. And don't get me wrong, this would not have happened without close coordination with the governor's office. So we got the blessing, certainly not me, blessing.
But my question is this. It is an unfunded position. You obviously haven't laid somebody off to and transferred that money into this. You've got everybody there. You're still paying your electric bill. You're still paying your water bill. Where is this money coming from? And if you've got enough money laying around to pay this position, why do we need to allocate more money?
It comes down to a cash flow conversation. So at this moment, as we spend through the $9.1 million, just like at your personal bank account, you can spend the money, but at the end of the year, everything's got to equal. Budget and revenues have got to equal.
Mine sort of has to equal every month, but anyway.
Well, it's a cash flow. So
right,
at the end of the year, without the 180, we're in the negative.
All right. Next question. You mentioned contracts and you mentioned open records and maybe a few other things, but those are not $120,000 a year positions. I mean, the Attorney General is hiring people that do a multiple amount of things and a lot of different agencies, and so even the entry-level folks have to be conversant with a lot of areas of the law. And I understand that you would like to be able to hire somebody who's got experience, but these are entry-level kinds of issues that you're talking about when you're talking about contracts and you're talking about open records and complying with that. And all of us would like to hire somebody with lots and lots of experience, but I don't know that it's necessary for that position. You haven't told us anything that would make it necessary for that position.
Mr. Chairman, I don't want to be on record as being argumentative with you, but I would suggest that in fact some of those issues can be very complex, and when you have someone with the experience to handle those complex issues, it's feasible to think that somebody that can handle an issue like that quickly may in fact save you money.
Well, and I don't want to be argumentative, but at the same time, a lot of the agencies that have attorneys on staff are to deal with basic fundamental type stuff, and when they get to complex stuff, they go to the Attorney General's office because that's what that office is there for. All right, now my last question is this. All right, how long has the Department of Defense been in business in the state of Georgia? And if we are just hiring a lawyer that is now an essential position, and especially it has to be somebody with a lot of experience and is at the higher end of the pay scale, what have we been doing up until this time, and how have we survived this long?
Sir, we have in the past had an executive counsel position. As a matter of fact, Colonel Ferrero originally came to the department with General Nesbitt as that executive counsel position. And as budget cuts occurred over the last 6 to 8 years, that's when the funding for that position was eliminated.
Okay, so how long
to answer your question, we most likely leaned more heavily on our JAG officers and or the Department of Law when necessary.
Okay. Representative Evans?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just had an informational question about the person who's already been hired and is already being paid. How many years of experience as a lawyer does the person have?
Ma'am, I'm not positive of the exact answer to your question, but I would suggest 30 plus years.
Okay, thank you.
Let me ask you, throughout your budget, are there any other positions in here that were not approved that have been added?
Not that I'm aware of, sir.
This is the only one?
That I'm aware of, yes, sir.
And you insinuated that the governor's office was aware of this and that approved this?
Correct, sir.
how often do we do this? And I understand the need. We're not in session 365 days a year, and I know that during the year there may come a time when you need somebody like this. How often does this happen?
I would suggest to you that it happens pretty often. I don't know the other agents. At one point I had privy to a few budgets, but I would suggest to you that there are times when you guys are not in session that there is a need. So, and I'll give you another example, that there is a critical need in an agency that they go to the governor's office and say, we need to accomplish X, Y, Z, so therefore we would like to bring these resources on board to accomplish that goal. I'll give you another example, Youth Challenge Program. We went to the governor's office, and which is the next item that I need to cover with you guys. We went to the governor's office and said, they've reduced the FFP, the federal financial participation rate, on us from 75% to 70%. If you all, there's a crossroads here. Either reduce the number of admissions that come into the Youth Challenge Academy because we need to reduce the cadre positions in order to meet the budget savings. We'll do that. The governor's office concurred that they didn't want to do that, that they wanted to continue the Youth Challenge program at the current levels that we're accustomed to. So they agreed for us to continue at Fort Stewart like we had been and admit those children into that program. So I would suggest to you that I don't know the answer, but I suggest to you that it happens often.
Okay, one last question.
Yes, sir.
In this particular case, could we not have contracted with him or contracted with someone instead of adding it on his position?
You always have the ability to contract.
Would it have saved us money?
No way for me to answer that, sir.
And just, I'm sorry, one last thing, and I promise you, but again, to your earlier comment that this is not about the person, it's about the position.
Correct.
Thank you. Because I hope you understand that the questions that are being asked by this committee are about the position, not about the person.
I'm good, sir.
All right. Any other questions about the council position? If not, then move to the Youth Challenge.
Yes, sir. Thank you. The Youth Challenge program is a program, and we have two locations, one at Fort Gordon down in Augusta and one at Fort Stewart in Hinesville. These are programs that are for at-risk youth from ages 15 to 18. It is a 22-week residential program and then a 12-month post-residential program to where they are paired with mentors of their choice, which in my opinion, before I sat in this position, is the beauty of the program. They have that 12-month mentorship with the mentor of their choosing that follows up on these children to make sure that they're applying the things that they learned while they were in the residential environment. This program, about 5 or so years ago, was a 60-40 program, 60% federal funds, 40% state funds. And a few years ago, they changed it to 75-25. Now they're rocking back the other way, and it's now a 70-30 program. So in order to, to continue to set the standard nationally in this program, we went to the governor's office, and they agreed that we needed to keep it at the current levels that it's at. And so this $591,000 and change is basically reflecting the reduction of 5% on the federal side. To make sure we stay on target with graduating about 400 kids per year at both programs.
You've only got that in the amended. You don't have it in the 15.
Correct, sir. And the reason we only have it in the amended is because we kind of wanted to take a wait-and-see approach on the federal side. This program, not to get too far in the weeds with you, but this program is funded out of prior year federal dollars. So while we're in federal 14, we won't know what the state fiscal 15 budget is for this program until we hear from National Guard Bureau, the Athletics and Youth Division of National Guard Bureau. But at the end of federal 13 is when they informed us they were cutting it. So we're kind of taking a wait-and-see approach. But I would suggest to you that we will be requesting that in the 15 amended.
Okay. All right. Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, this program, I have a question about. The program, of course, the Fort Stewart part is arguably in the best district in the state. You all do a wonderful job.
Without question, without question. Not
I
even
thought
arguing.
that would wake some folk up. Now, there's talk of opening another campus in Milledgeville. Is this in the 15, or I don't see any changes? How is that going to be absorbed?
No, the short answer is no, sir. There is no budget request in the either 14 amended or 15 for a third campus. You are correct in that we would certainly enjoy a third campus here in the state of Georgia. A location certainly has not been identified for that. Obviously, you know, the beauty of some surplus state property out there that we could make use of would certainly make it an interesting proposition. But to answer your question, no, sir, there's no budget request for it currently, and a decision on where that location would be has not been decided. As you know, the two current locations are kind of below the gnat line kind of thing. So, and most of the kids do come from, you know, Fulton, Gwinnett, DeKalb, those, you know, the higher concentration of youth. So, so we would love, you know, and enjoy and hopefully get the support of National Guard Bureau for a third campus. But with them funding at currently 70% of it, we've not seen the dollars for that third campus as of yet.
Follow up on money. Question also, you've recently put in, like with the last class, the diploma program to augment the GED program, but I did not see, will that change any cost in the program, or is that going to be able to be folded into your existing budget?
To my knowledge, that will not impact cost.
Okay.
That is, and I'm a little out of my wheelhouse on programmatic issues. They like to keep me in my cubicle with a green visor on counting peanuts. But that is a great partnership with local school systems to allow these children to walk out of the YCA program with a diploma, which just increases their ability to, you know, gain employment or move on to the armed services or higher education.
Any other questions? Okay, if there are no other questions, then that will conclude on the Department of Defense. Thank you, sir. Juvenile justice.
Mr. Chair, thank you for allowing us to come today. Let me direct you to page
Let me ask you a question. We've got approximately 20 minutes allocated for y'all. Do you think we can do both, or do you think we ought to just stick with the 14 amended?
14.
Okay, we'll hear from you later too.
Yeah.
All right. All right. So we're looking at 14 amended.
Yes, sir. Page 133. Who I have with me today is Sonia Allen. She's our CFO. The seat is kind of warm now.
Wait till we got here.
So if you see me moving now, that's
Don't get hire no lawyers.
Avery, you aren't asking if any legal counsel y'all been paying for the last 7 or 8 months, have you?
no, sir. But what we want to do is make sure, and this is good, that we are doing an operational realignment. And on page 133, the transfer to DCH, foster care for our CMO, the state share funds of the 173, 4 months contract between DJJ and DBH DD.
Let me stop you for a minute.
Okay.
If you could maybe say all of those words out instead of all of the letters, I think it would probably help us.
All right. Department of Behavior, Health with Disability.
You can talk faster than that. Now just just don't give me the initial.
It's kind Kind of warm here. Did they shave the legs off and lean forward on it? But yes, sir, 173. And then the next item is moving things from our administrative section, budget realignment in our long-term care facilities, which is our YDC. Realignment of the positions related and related expenditures of the 2.5. Then that second item is the budget realignment in our RYDC, which is our regional youth detention facilities. That's short-term facilities of the 1.7, realigning those positions and related expenditures. Give you a total for that administrative area of 4.2 realignment. Page 134, and this is our secure commitment areas, our YDC long-term commitment facilities. Budget realignment for BIA Ireland of the 1.9, and it's to move the operation expenses to the FY15.
In other words, you're going to delay the opening of that facility?
That is correct, sir.
Okay.
And then the second item is the budget realignment from administration of the 2.5, realigning those position and related expenditures. And then the third item is the budget realignment for our RYDCs, Regional Youth Detention Facilities. And that's to realign the budget and expenditures of the 751. And now we're into the secure detention, which is our RYDCs, and it's to move that operation and expenses for the Clayton RYDC of $965,000, and that's for the 20-bed expansion of 6 months of operational expenditures, which opened 1/1 of 14, that section of that particular facility. Second item is that operating expense for Rockdale RYDC of 2.6, and it's a 52-bed facility where we did an addition on, and that was 6 months of operational expenditures, which opened 7/1 of 13. Third item is the staffing for the metro areas of the $963,000, and that included your Clayton, DeKalb, Metro, Marietta, and Rockdale, and that's for personal services funds to provide full-time staffing of those locations. And then the fourth item is the closure of Paulden RYDC. The closing of that was the savings of the 3.1 mil, and that was a 100-bed reduction, and that's the 6 months of contractual funding that we had contract savings for YSI, which is a contract provider that we were having up at Paulden. And then the fifth item there is the budget realignment from administration of 1.7, realigning those positions and related expenditures. And then the last item there is the budget realignment to the YDC, which is our long-term care facilities of the 751, and that's to realign the budget with the expenditures. And that section for the secure detention is the 2.4.
So ultimately what you're doing is you're moving money around, but effectively your budget has gone down $600,000. Is that roughly
That
it?
is correct, sir.
Okay. All right, number 18.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I do apologize. Of course, we're trying to spread going from one committee to another for being a little tardy. But having come in late, and I just see on 30.4.3, you actually, and I represent Clayton County just for the record, but you actually have Clayton and DeKalb and Marietta spelled out, and then you got Metro. Typically, we call Clayton Metro, so I want to know what Metro means in this item.
That's the name of our facility.
Oh, Metro, gotcha. Thank you.
Other questions? We heard from the Department of Corrections when they were here a little earlier that, of course, they have started seeing some impact from criminal justice reform, and of course the juvenile justice reform was just adopted the session a year ago, so
Yes.
it's a little soon for you to see, but are you seeing anything from that yet?
Yes, sir, and I'm glad that you allow, or that question came up, because the thing about it is, when you really look at the reduction, there's a reduction in juvenile justice, meaning for the last year and a half, 2 years, our numbers as it relates to commitments, those long-term commitments are coming down. Ran some numbers compared to October of last year, November and December. October, November, and December, and you see a lot of activity and movement as it relates to the judges taking hold and running with juvenile justice reform and not committing as many youth as we did in the past. So our numbers for our secure confinements are off. When I say off, meaning a reduction in that. So I wait to see exactly when juvenile justice kick in the first quarter to see those numbers fall more.
Now, part of the juvenile justice reform involved keeping the less violent and the less serious offenders more in the community and providing community services there, rather than mixing them up with the hardened and the ones who really need to be locked up. Are y'all involved in that aspect of the criminal justice reform, or just the incarceration part?
Well, a little of both. You know, the governor's office, through the governor's office, we did the incentive grants for those counties that commit me the most business. One of them was a $5 million incentive grant, and the other one was $1 million. And what transpired with that, the way that we get involved in that, is those kids that we, or the judges, will put in the community to get the right resources to keep them from coming into our system. With the help of the governor's office, we were able to furnish transportation. Number one issue with people in certain areas of the state is inadequate transportation. So we were allowed to purchase vans and transport those kids that's committed to us or on the verge of being committed, as it relates to trying to prevent them from coming into the system, to make sure that that treatment happens to those kids before they actually be a tax burden on the state.
So the community service aspect of the juvenile reform is actually being provided by the locals, but maybe under state grant, but it's basically a local service.
Yes, sir. And it's a partnership, because the thing about it is, if we can prevent them from coming in, keep them focused, and get the treatment that they really need before they actually get in our system, you know, when it's spending in the neighborhood of $90,000+ to house them, can you imagine what Georgia will look like if we really, really focus and get the youth the help that they need? Flip side of that, when you have 80% of the people that's incarcerated in the adult system, 80% of them was part of the juvenile system. And if we can prevent them from coming in, can you imagine how it will look 5 years down the road?
Okay. Questions? Well, we'll see you again when we start talking about the 15th. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Y'all have a blessed evening.
Okay, thank you.
And the seat is kind of cool for the next one.
You can come back and talk about
Don't get your lawyers.
Prosecuting attorneys. Hey, Chuck, y'all planning on hiring any lawyers?
I was going to address that right off the bat there, Mr. Chairman. I'll say thank you on the front side, because I'm not certain that I'm going to be saying it on the back side. I'll start when you're ready, Mr. Chairman. I'm here today on behalf of the prosecuting attorneys and the district attorneys of this state. Seated with me is Denise Pacini. She is the district attorney in the Cordele Circuit, and she's currently the chairman of the prosecuting attorneys.
Wait just a minute, Chuck. Excuse me. Okay. All right. I'm going to, even though we've all got tracking sheets, the House has a set of tracking sheets, Senate has a set of tracking sheets, and you may or may not have the tracking sheets that we're going, and we all got different numbers. The only thing that we have the same numbers on are the governor's budget recommendations. So if everybody, when we refer to it, so that we're all dealing with the same thing, would try to refer to the governor's budget, please.
Okay, which I believe is on page 43 for our 2014. The way I've got it prepared, Mr. Chairman, is I can go through the 2014. We're going to hit a couple of the items that would be relevant to 15, and it probably wouldn't take us an extra 5 minutes to do
it.
The 15. Okay. Again, Denise Vicini's with us. She's the current chairman of the council. David Miller, the district attorney that's responsible generally for our budget process, is with us, and also Danny Porter from Gwinnett, that is the DA's representative on legislation. Remember, it is the purpose of the council to assist the prosecuting attorneys throughout this state in their efforts against criminal activity in the state. Now, does everybody have the PowerPoint I'm working off of? It is blue. Looks in this nature. And I'm on to the second page. I want to quickly give you an update on the implementation of the accountability court ADA positions that you did fund last year, talk about a few operational challenges, and talk about the budget request. The second slide on page 2 is a chart that we have put together from the Administrative Office of the Courts that shows you the growth in accountability courts in this state. And remember that accountability courts has been a primary focus and a main part of criminal justice reform. These courts are taking these inmates that had been going into the prison system, keeping them in a court system that we as the prosecutors are intricately involved in forward these days. So these programs have shifted them out of jail and keeping them in court. And as you've seen, we've seen at least a 20% increase over the last 2 years. In 2000, there were 6 of these courts in the state. At the end of 13, there was 125. So there's been a huge shift in that. On the page 3, in 2014, we originally requested, and the governor supported, basically funding an assistant DA for half of the circuits in this state, and this budget funded 12 of those positions. Now let me kind of get to the bottom of that number right quick, since that's been an issue today. That figure is based on a starting salary of $50,023, which is an assistant DA or a lawyer with between 3 to 6 years experience in practice or prosecution. It includes a 56.89% fringe and benefits attachment, so for a total of $78,000 is what we pay the 12 assistant DAs that we've hired. We had 26 applications from within the state for those positions. The PAC's Personnel and Accountability Courts committees came together, created a formula by which we allocated those. Presence of existing accountability courts in the circuits was, of course, a priority. The age of the courts, the planned expansion in the following year, the number of court participants or actual individuals that are in these courts, and the support structure, resources, and commitment by other partners were all the factors that came into play. As you'll see on page 4, that is a map of how the ADAs ended up deploying. Actually, it's a very good representation of throughout the state deploying those assets. So that's what we've done so far with what you give us. Now, continued challenges as far as assistant DAs are concerned, because the other thing that you allocated for us this year was a half-step increase for our experienced assistant DAs. That were ones that were working for us 12 months or more and continue to stay with us. While we've made a substantial step, and we do want to say how much we appreciate what we've been able to do, I want to show you on the bottom of page 4 how we're continuing to have a problem. Whereas we've been averaging about 5 to 6% retention or folks leaving us rate, if you look in 2013, we've had a significant increase of the lawyers that are leaving us. What used to happen is we used to use lawyers after about 3 or 4 or 5 years. We would give them the experience. They would go to work in other practices and what have you for substantially more money, quite frankly. Used to, we'd lose lawyers for $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 increases in pay, and we understood that. Now what's starting to happen is there are positions available. There are lawyers that are hiring again, and we're losing assistant DAs now over $10,000 and $15,000 a year because we haven't had an increase in 5 years. As you see this last year, we had a total of a 14% turnover rate, including 11 retirees out of the 405 and 46 assistant DAs that left us. Now, these are not assistants that just went to another circuit. They left the state payroll. You see on page 5, again, the original request was for a full step increase. You appropriated a percentage of that, and that's the way the agency implemented it. It was a half step increase. The next thing that we'll talk about is travel. This has been a problem for us for several years. Again, we like other agencies, have had to take some cuts, and understandably so. Talk about travel at the end of page 5. In 2007, before we started taking the cuts, there was a travel budget allocated to the district attorneys of $958,000 and some change. We currently have about $550,000 allocated to that. What we had to do because of that was we had to create a formula by which we included and made decisions based on geography, number of ADAs, and caseloads, and figure out how to deploy that, because our circuits are quite diverse. Most of you that have practiced and understand the difference in a metro circuit or a rural circuit, and some of our circuits have got 7 and 8 counties, so they're very diverse. And again, we've had a significant turnover, and what we've seen in losing our experienced lawyers that are leaving payroll and are retiring is we're hiring brand new lawyers. We trained 106 brand new assistant DAs out of the 405 this year at our fundamentals, which was a 45% increase over any prior year. So the baby lawyers are who we can get to work for us, and that's what's going on. Page 6 talks about a little bit of the travel and how we've gotten to the numbers that we've presented to you. During the economic downturn, circuits were able to leverage appropriations that came from the state with some local funds, some other funding sources to meet our goals. So when we first started for 2014, we requested $155,000. That request was a reflection of 22 of the 49 circuits saying they needed more money than what had been allocated according to the formula. As the year has progressed, as the local funds have gone to dry up, as the counties, quite frankly, have said, you represent the state, you work for the state, they need to be paying for your travel. That's what the statutes say. The request that we've shown you for 14 and 15 is now a reflection of 38 of the 49 circuits that don't have enough money to get travel and to get the training needed. Now, here's where we're at. We've submitted a request for 2014 supplemental that I'm going to withdraw today, but I want to explain to you why. We've got several things that we've been able to do in this fiscal year, 2014, that won't repeat themselves. Specifically, the 12 new assistant DAs that were allocated to us, the money given to us was enough to hire them earlier in the year than we did. But then because the instructions were to stagger those throughout the year, because we had to come up with a process by which to allocate those and fairly see that they get to where they belong, and the fact that it took several of the DAs that were allocated these time to find somebody that was qualified to take that position that would take it for the amount of money we were offering, we're going to have a one-time savings in 2014. Also, the council has continued to implement what's a 2-month hiring freeze. So if Denise has an assistant DA leave payroll, she has to hold it open for 2 months until she can hire it, unless that employee left and went to another agency and there was no payout or no other expenses associated with that. We started out with 4 months. We were able to lower it to 2 months in June of 2010, but we've continued to implement that this year. We intend to take that off the district attorneys in the forthcoming year, if at all possible.
Was that a statewide rule or just through your department?
It's how we've had to manage our business, so we've done that ourselves. It started out furloughs. Remember, we were one of the agencies that took substantial furloughs in the first few years of the downturn. We were able to slowly get away from the furloughs as things regulated and as you were allocated us more money. But we've continued to do that to be able to balance, quite frankly, our budget, because there's no real fluff in our budget. It's 2 things. It's personnel and it's travel. So there's no being a little extra at the end of the year unless some of these one-time things have taken place. And the third thing that we did this year that has saved us money one time is the half-step increases. Instead of, it was allocated to us across the board for the year. What we did was, following what we believed to be the instructions of the legislature, is they only went into effect on the anniversary date of the assistant DA. In other words, once you've done another year, then you got a promotional step increase. That's, again, saved us one time. So what I'm saying at this point, when we submitted our 2014 supplemental, and when we did so back at the governor's guidelines, we didn't know where we were going to fall. But now that we have implemented this, we believe we can cover the fourth quarter of this fiscal year of the actual training dollar needed by the district attorneys in this state with the one-time savings that we've done here. So the only request that we're going to continue for the 2014 supplemental is the next piece, which is risk premiums that I'm going to quickly tell you about. My understanding of the way the Department, DOAS, has allocated premiums for risk insurance, automotive, liability, unemployment, workers' comp has changed during the fiscal year. And whereas in the past that allocation has been based on number of employees in the state, which comparatively we don't have a large number of employees in the state compared to other agencies, it's been changed to salary-based allocation, which we have some of the higher-based employees pay in the state because we employ mostly attorneys. That has caused a $96,843 bill to us that we didn't have an allocation from. Now, my understanding of dealing with DOAS is that because of that internal shift, that money is somewhere else. It's being sent to us as a bill, but it should, because of the way the allocation has been changed, otherwise be available somewhere in the state budget. Because we haven't done anything to incur additional cost, it's the way it's being allocated. And I know I talked to a couple of members ahead of time about that. Staff may have some input about that, but that is an actual bill that we have or will get for DOAS for our premiums this year. So that's the only thing at this point that we're actually asking for in 14 is to cover that actual bill. I do want to make you aware of the fact, and this has happened since our submittal, is that we found ourselves in another lawsuit over indigent defense, interestingly enough, in the Cordell Circuit, where the district attorney and her assistants have been named personally in a continued session of litigation that has gone on in that circuit. This is one of those situations where the Attorney General is going to most likely have a conflict because they're already representing other parties in this, and we've had to do this in the past when we've had to come and actually retain counsel for one of our district attorneys because the AG can't do it because of conflict. We may be back to you about some money for that because there's no money in the budget for it. So I'll make you aware of that. That is our presentation on the 14th, and I'd certainly entertain any questions.
Okay. Representative Hightower.
I do have a question. I know this can be a sensitive topic. You and I have kind of touched on this before, but when you go back to travel, the reason I know about this is because it happened in an area in my district. You have, unfortunately, a DA who's been in the news quite often in our area, and a lot of that was based on spending. They targeted most of that on travel, automobiles, lunches, dinners. I mean, this was exuberant amounts of money for what was going on. But when I see that, but then you come and you need money for travel, how many other areas and DAs have that much discretionary income that we're not seeing, that they're coming and asking for travel money, but yet they can go and do those types of things? And I'm not saying that anything was done wrong, and please, and that's why I was hesitant to bring it up here. I'm not accusing anyone of doing something wrong, but the fact of the matter is the money was there and the money was used, and there was a lot of it. So if others have those type of resources, why do you need more from us?
Yep. Let me please address that head on. In that particular case, a large amount of that money, first of all, let me explain to you the way asset forfeiture works. Certain DAs, particularly the Metro DAs, have got more resources than others, and they're allowed and have the ability to participate in some pretty complex drug cases that often land in forfeitures. A lot of the money comes from involvement in federal prosecutions, where a district attorney's office starts a case, gets involved in it, becomes a partner in the federal process, and then ultimately ends up with some amount of money for that. That is the only amount of money, quite frankly, that the district attorneys have got as much discretion over they do. Part of the proposals of HB1 this time around is, and part of our proposal is to limit that considerably and then put in place the same kind of restrictions on forfeiture money that currently exist about travel dollar. For instance, travel dollar in the circuits that don't have condemnation money and other funds, this is all they've got. And it's about getting to and from court. It's about transporting witnesses, it's about the once or twice a year training, and it's about training new prosecutors. So that forfeiture money, though in some offices is a substantial amount of money, that's not that common in most district attorneys' offices, and it's not a predictable source of income. The few offices that do have it and have access to it have had an awful lot of discretion about that in the past. And quite frankly, I believe this legislative session is going to see some changes to that, and we'll submit to you that that needs to take place. But that is not a sustainable amount of money. It is not consistent in the circuits, and this travel dollar, actually, what it has done, the circuits that participate in the federal forfeitures and have those monies, they're not the circuits that have submitted money needing this travel budget. This travel budget is based on actual submittals from each of the individual circuits where they've had to articulate exactly what their need is, what it costs them to drive, quite frankly, these old raggedy cars we've got from one courthouse to the next, what it costs to keep them running, and those circuits don't have access to asset forfeiture money. The circuits that have asked for this money just don't have access to that kind of money.
I can tell you specifically, my circuit, I don't get federal forfeiture funds. I don't participate in it. We do the civil forfeitures, but the money goes to law enforcement. And so the travel money I have for a rural area with 4 counties for my assistant DAs to go to make it to court and back and to get training comes from the money that we're requesting here.
So you have a choice of whether to take it or not?
We can choose not to. We let it go back. I don't take the percentage, and it goes back to law enforcement.
I'm sorry.
Oh, you're fine. So, next question that I have then, let's say that we do this travel budget, we give you this money for travel. Who decides where it goes into which districts? Because you're saying this was only submitted by a few, right? Or not all the districts submitted the request, right?
At this point, all but 10 have asked for additional dollar above what we've already got allocated according to the formula by which we allocated it originally.
And you're saying, so the 10 that didn't ask, they're part of these 10 that have access to this money?
No, the 10 that didn't ask have said that they can make do with what we've already allocated to them out of the original 550. Remember when we took almost a 50% cut?
Mm-hmm.
Instead of just cutting everybody across the board 50%, what we did was we implemented a policy that we could understand that makes sense, that addressed number of assistant DAs, number of courthouses they had to attend court, number of days of court, and other factors including the depth, the width, how big geographically the circuit is. So we broke that $550,000 up over that formula. What this actually is the amount of money that DAs have said, I get the formula, it makes sense. However, I've got a judge that holds court 5 days a week in this one county that I can't leave somebody at full time, and somebody has to go back and forth, and that's the way we do it. So the individual budgets now have been submitted to us from each DA. We're not, and if this money were to be allocated, this is the way it will be spent in those individual counties to, quite frankly, pay for gas in the cars and pay for maintenance of the cars. It's not buying cars. It's not any of that. It's mileage. Some of them are having to do mileage because they don't have cars. Each circuit is different, but each circuit has articulated exactly what they're asking for.
You see what my worry is, my concern? My concern is that we allocate these funds, but then it gets directed to places that don't necessarily need it as bad as others. And that was the initial concern, because I know what was going on in one particular area. They had it. If we'd give them more money, I mean, they didn't need it. We need it to go to where the direct people that need it. We need to get to those more rural places that don't have the access to these funds. And I guess I was trying to see, and you answered, how do we know that it's going to those that need it and not just to the ones that already have the funds?
Well, we've gotten there by going through this process. Okay. Quite frankly, when we took a 50% cut in travel, that got down to the bones of who needed what to travel for where. We don't. I'm gonna be honest with you. I don't know how we got to where almost $1 million was what was in the budget, because it was before my time. But I can tell you this: the 550 plus the 360,000 we're asking for now, I understand it completely, and I can tell you to a dime what's going to each circuit and what they are going to use it for.
Gotcha. Okay.
And so that's what's come of this process, is we know exactly what you're asking now, and that's the advantage of the Prosecuting Attorney's Council managing this money as opposed to direct allocation to individual DA's offices. Is that's what we do, is we insure it.
We've been asked to go back and look at the travel we're doing, where our assistants are going, whether it's necessary, and how many times they need to go to court and travel. And the training is very limited. We don't go but one of the conventions or the training sessions that the Prosecuting Attorneys Council has, the two big summer and winter, we can only allow for one. So it's very limited, but we have been put in the position of showing what we need, why we need it, and how it's being spent.
And I want you to understand, I am not opposed to travel dollars. That is not it at all. I mean, in the Coweta Judicial Circuit, which is in my district, it's 5 counties. I know my DA travels all over the place. I know that he needs this. I know he's talked to me about this. I know the concern. But it sounds like y'all are doing y'all are addressing what my concern was. I want to make sure that when we do it, it goes to the right places. So, and I think y'all are doing that. So, thank you.
If I don't hear any other questions, I'll knock out 15 if you want me to.
Senator C.
Yeah, and again, I've been in left field once today, and I might be still in left field, but I just, while I was listening to the questions and answers, I know in my district, my DA, I just had a flood of calls regarding a $54,000 check given to her office or her personally, I don't know. But I'm not sure if that's done anywhere else and why it was being done. You haven't a clue. You're shaking your head. Okay. All right. It seems that our county cut a check to our DA for $54,000, and of course our county is struggling like most counties, and that was an uproar because they saw it as, even though when I called down there, quite honestly, I was told this was a one-time and that the commissioners had agreed to. And you're looking at me like,
No, I mean, I would be
$54,000 to anybody's county is a lot of money.
It is.
And it seems nobody seems to know why, what, when, where, or how much, but apparently, and part of the reason I was moving with trepidation is because being at the state level and we do allocate funding, I didn't want to get in the weeds because we had a lot of investigations going on and all this other, so I kind of like, but this just brought that up again because, again, $54,000 is a lot of money.
I would be glad to get with your district attorney and try to find out what the deal is on that. I don't
Okay. And I'm not trying to get in the weeds with them. I'm just trying to.
Sure.
When my phone rings, then I feel a need to say something.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
All right. Are there any other questions on the 14 as amended? As I understand what your current request is now, you're withdrawing your enhancement of travel money for the 14 amended. And so the only thing you're asking for us to do is the liability insurance or that appropriation.
That is correct.
All right. Talk to us about the 15.
Okay. One of the main things that's coming out of our 15 request is, if I can step back just a minute and talk a little bit about criminal justice reform. That's been talked about a good bit today. The district attorneys have been very supportive of that. We've been involved in all 3 levels, or all 3 times that's taken place. We've had district attorneys serve on that. We're supportive of it. One of the concepts of criminal justice reform is also reinvestment, judicial reinvestment. So one of the conversations we had very early on with the governor, and the reason I believe it's in the governor's budget, has been the fact that these accountability courts and these new approaches to keeping people in the court system and out of the prison system has created a good bit of additional work on behalf of the prosecutors of this state. So one of the original requests, and as you can see last year, the initial funding portion of it is ultimately to put an assistant DA in each circuit to handle accountability courts and similarly programs. So what we've added into the 2015 is what is the balance, because the original conversation was about spreading it out over 2 years. We started out at 25 last year. We ended up at 12, so we've at least put the figure in and asked for 35 additional. Now, 35 additional would bring it to a total of 47, and of course you hear me use the number 49 all the time for circuits. There are 2 circuits that have an additional assistant district attorney because of the way their circuits were split at the time. So we're not asking to double dip in those circuits. We're acknowledging that those 2 circuits don't need that resource. That figure that is in the 2015 for the lawyers is at that same figure I used earlier, which is a base salary of $50,023. It's based on a 3 to 6 year experienced attorney, because typically you can't put a brand new lawyer managing those kind of cases. It's got to be somebody that at least understands what we're doing, has processed cases, and can make decisions about yes, this is a prison case, no, this is an accountability court case, and that kind of thing. So that is the first main request out of the 2015 budget, is to finish funding the accountability court assistant DAs under the concept of judicial reinvestment. Moving on to page 9 of my presentation, the increase for the additional half step of the promotional step increase. This is finishing what we started last year. We split a promotional year, and this would be the balance to do the other half of that in this upcoming year. Again, allocating what used to be and what most of those assistants hired on is eligible once a year. We've at least spread that over a 2-year period.
How much is that?
It is $867,000 on the district attorney's program side, and it is $25,342 for the 9 lawyers that work for my office. Does not include me. The next increase, again, would be the continuation of the travel dollar that we've had extensive conversation about. It's the same concepts based on the same request that we've told you that we think we can fund in this fourth quarter that we would not be able to fund next year because of the one-time savings will be gone. The premium increase that we've discussed, the $96,843, would be continued into 15. On to page 10. Again, we've talked about travel. That's a duplicate slide because I felt like we might, if we got back into it, I wanted those numbers back in front of me. And the other thing that was added at the bottom of page 10 was to annualize the 2 assistant DAs that were created by HB 106 last year for the Chattahoochee and the Oconee judicial circuits for the additional judgeships that were created last year.
All right. Talking about the assistant DAs for the accountability courts.
Yes, sir.
Because that's your biggest ticket item right there.
No doubt. Yes, sir.
And I got a couple of questions for you
Yes,
on that. Number one, sort of going with Representative Hightower's, we need to put them where we need to put them. I know that there are some circuits that either don't participate in accountability courts or that already are having extra time with DAs, and so they're contracting out those DAs to prosecute cases in juvenile court or what have you. So it's not like we've got folks that are fully employed now and an accountability court is going to strap us to the max. So how do we put resources where we are, where we need them, rather than just saying we need one in every circuit in the state?
I think a very valid question, and I think you have to look back at the practice that we did this year with the 12 you allocated it, and that's exactly what we did. We looked at who had the need for it now, who had the most need for it. We had counties and district attorneys that had the need for it, and I'll use Denise and David Miller's examples, that withdrew their applications because of their involvement in this. That there's some other circuits that said, we've got accountability courts, but there's counties and circuits that need it most. So 26 of the 49 applied for the first round. We, of course, turned down, half of the ones that applied. So we know the need is there. I'll acknowledge that there are still, I think, 3 circuits in this state that don't have an accountability court at this moment. I will also submit to you that the accountability court is not something that's going away today. It is the new approach to these cases. It is how you're going to have to deal with these cases, and even the individuals that are not all that supportive of it, which at one time I would have to acknowledge was one of, you eventually got to get on board when you look at the facts. And the facts are they work. They are reducing the prison population. So I submit to you, by the time we get to fully fund these positions, I would hope that there would be a need in each circuit. But I will submit to you that this council is not willing to take resources that we sell to this legislature needed for that and deploy them in a place where that's not the need.
All right. My next question is, and maybe this is an education issue and you need to educate me on this, but there are basically 4 components in the court system that are involved in these cases, and that's probation, the judge, the prosecutor, and the defense attorney. but the only one that we see coming saying that we need an extra person in each one of these circuits. We don't see the judges coming and saying we need a new judge in every circuit that has accountability courts. We don't need a new defense attorney in each circuit that has an accountability court, and we aren't hearing corrections saying we need more probation officers in each one of these circuits that have accountability courts. Why are the prosecutors different?
Because we have been purposely and intentionally left out of, for instance, the $6 million that was allocated for accountability courts last year that pay for exactly what you're talking about, the judges staff, the support for all of that. None of that money has gone to prosecution because we were told that we were to come through the budget process and deal with it in this manner.
Told by who?
By the governor's office and by the funding sources for juvenile courts. There's none of that $6 million has been funded at all for prosecution.
Oh, you're talking about juvenile courts, not...
I said juvenile court, I thought for accountability courts. The accountability court money that's been funded through criminal justice reinvestment, none of it has come to prosecution. And what happens in...
But a lot of that money is going to case managers and drug testing. Is it going to personnel?
Yes. Yes, sir. It's going to personnel. The budgets for the grants that I've seen, a large part of that is personnel that are
because those are going to the counties or to the courts. They are not state-funded positions.
That's the positions are generally county positions that are being funded through those sources and the other sources of revenue.
So we're hiring judges at the county?
Not hiring judges, no, sir, but the judges are...
Are we hiring defense attorneys at the...
Imagine that. I can't speak to what indigent defense is or isn't doing with those. I know it's an issue for them because I've dealt with my counterpart in the public defender's office. But what happens in these accountability courts from a prosecution standpoint is we now take these cases that we were done with. As assistant DAs, once we got the case to court and got it prosecuted and done, we were done with it. Well, because of the model of accountability court and the fact that everybody's continuing to be involved in it and that it continues to be a process in court, the state has a continued role now that we didn't have in the past. Now, the probation officers and the judges and them continue to deal with those cases as probation cases, as probation revocation cases, that kind of thing. I can't speak to that. But the case that we used to get closed at adjudication, we're now involved in sometimes 2, 3, however many years that process lasts, that we now have to allocate personnel to that we didn't have personnel for. So that's how it's changed our world.
If I could add, let me tell you, in my circuit, we don't have an accountability court. We have a probation light program which operates to some degree as an accountability court, but we have not, we've had very limited resources, and so there's not a structured accountability court. The only way, and during this application process, when the DA's offices were making application for this particular position, I think one of the only ways to get there is for there to be someone who is leading the development of it, and prosecutors are an integral part of this because the decision of who goes into accountability court and who is not eligible for accountability court has to be something that the prosecution has input in. If they're not the gatekeeper, at least a large part of it. And so there's different levels of application for the desire and the need for an accountability court, the point where you're going to be in the development of it, but there has been no funding source for us to get there. And accountability courts can work and do great things, but when there's absolutely no source for the prosecution side of it, it's simply never going to get to the level it needs to get to.
So that's the reason why you haven't implemented it?
Why we don't have
right.
We do not have a funding source for it.
Okay, you said there were 3 circuits that don't have accountability courts, and yours is one of them?
I don't have an accountability court. We have a probation light program that the Department of Corrections has, like a pilot program that operates to some degree as an accountability court for people who are already on probation. But my circuit does not have an accountability court.
And you say the reason why is because you don't have a funding source?
Well, in large part, it's because I did not make it. I am not one of the ones who got an accountability court position. And I acknowledge that we don't have an accountability court, so I shouldn't be one of the ones who gets one of these initial positions that was granted. But if we're ever going to get there, it's going to be because we seriously, and we know that we have a funding source that I can hire an assistant DA who I can put in an accountability court, and then we can actually truly get that going.
But the other circuits didn't have an assistant DA, did they? And they implemented it.
I think a lot of courts were taking people who had a lot of other work to do, sending them into accountability courts on top of everything that they were already doing in order to participate and be part of a program that the court was attempting to develop. But if you're going to really get these programs going and have people who are professional and know exactly who should be and who's going to make it and helping them succeed in these accountability courts, they need to be people who are dedicated and trained in that particular area.
Okay, I obviously can't argue that point, but the other two circuits that didn't implement it, is that the reason why?
Fundamentally, when there's no resources at all, that's where they've had the hardest time.
Do you know where they are?
One of them is mine, and it's not because of money.
It's not because of money? Why is it?
Judges haven't bought into it.
So we have some judges that haven't bought into this?
We have some judges that haven't bought into it, and we have some prosecutors that have been reluctant to bring it to buy into it. Now, again, I admit that I was initially one that didn't until you sit down and look at the facts and actually understand how these things are working, and if the numbers speak for themselves, they are working.
Well, do we have those numbers that we can get out there? Because I'm a big fan. I mean, we've had it in Chatham County for years, and it makes a difference.
Yes, sir. Yeah, the numbers are there. They're pretty impressive.
But let me defend anyone who has been concerned about it. Is that if your community lacks resources, you're kind of trying to figure out what came first, the chicken or the egg, in terms of dealing with that problem. And I can tell you that in rural areas, you can have someone you're attempting treatment for, but there may not be the treatment programs available.
Well, David Miller is back there behind you, and he's got a 5-county circuit, and y'all have only got it in 1 county right now, but this is your first year, and depending on how it goes, then I would anticipate your judges will buy in for it on all your, at least, non-rural areas.
Yes, sir. That was the pilot project of Judge Horkin stepped up to the plate and said, we want to try this in Moultrie. It's been very supported by the people of Colquitt County, and I would like to see it spread to the rest of the circuit, particularly Lowndes and Thomas.
And that's generally how they get started.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, I'm from Gwinnett. We've had an accountability court program there for 7 years. It was started by Judge Billy Ray. We supported it on a part-time basis by assigning assistant DAs in there. The judges reallocated their workload to allow Judge Ray to handle the accountability court, and in return, he gave up some of his other criminal work, and it was spread amongst the 10. So it was done on an ad hoc basis. They've had access, the judges have had access to some of the $6 million and have used that for personnel, drug testing, but specifically prosecutors were excluded from those grant applications.
Again, to the numbers, can you get those to the committee members? Because I think that'll help us to sell.
Successfulness of
yes. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
The trick about that.
Are you going to turn on your light?
Well, the trick, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The trick about that is you have to have cooperation among prosecuting attorney counsel and the judges, and if you got that, then I believe public defenders counsel, but public defender standards counsel will be involved, by default, because they can't get out of it. Not that they would, now, Travis. Not that they would. But it's not just like we enact it and it gets implemented.
Since Travis is here, let's ask him: are you getting any funding, Travis?
I just came in case Chuck started lying.
Travis, are you getting? Are you getting any funding, Travis?
No, Mr. Chairman. It's the grant. CJCC,
come up to the microphone.
The CJCC grant does not pay for personnel. And so we don't get personnel, judges don't get personnel, the DAs don't get personnel. But we also don't have state appropriated funding either, if that's what you're asking me for, the accountability courts.
Well, I mean, we were hearing that everybody's getting money except for the prosecutors, and you aren't getting money.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. All right, anybody else on this one issue or on any other of the 2015 request? Thank you.
Thank you.
Department of Public Safety. Welcome, Colonel.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Members of the committee, how y'all doing? I'm working from the governor's recommendation for FY 2014, and it's starting on page 158. The
Yes.
Recommended, yes, sir. The first heading is in aviation, number 1, providing funds for operating expenses for life flight helicopters, and it's an addition of $115,290. And I'm going to pause there and save that because that is a move into what's in our 15 budget. So I'm going to move on from there and come back to that as it relates to the 15. Turning to page 159, under Field Operations and Services, State General Funds, providing funds for operating expenses for Post 52 in Hart County, well, about $1.4 million. We are working with Hart County to establish a new patrol post on I-85 for the 3 counties that come into our state at the Georgia-South Carolina line. Most of you know we have the smallest trooper force in the country with 828 troopers. The national average is 23 troopers per 100,000 residents. We've got 8.26. With that, this is an opportunity for us to grow in a corridor on I-85 to be able to provide the services to local law enforcement. There is no physical patrol post from Metro Atlanta, Gwinnett County, all the way to the South Carolina line. If you look at the interstate system in the rest of the state, we have properly positioned facilities all the way. So that's what the 1.4 million is. Number 2, replace federal and other funds with state funds for the Georgia Interoperability Network System. Most of you know our state does not have an overall public safety radio network. Each county, each municipality has a different type of system, whether it's an 800 system or a 700 system or a 400 megahertz system. What this network is the electronic capability to network all of those systems together in the event of a natural disaster. So that Mitchell County and Calhoun County that may be on different radio systems can talk to each other. There's 194 of these systems that are located throughout the state. The reason why we have the responsibility for this network is because we operate 50 of them with our own radio system. And so this is essentially a maintenance and assurance contract on an annual basis to be able to maintain this system. And number 3, other changes, utilize trooper attrition funds for equipment and personal service for graduates of upcoming trooper schools, and we ask for a yes. This is a continuation of what we've done over the past 2 years, such that on an annual basis, as we lose our personnel, which is about 40 to 50 troopers on an annual basis, the funds that remain in our budget for the salaries when they leave, we can use that to maintain our trooper school training. I wish we could just hire a trooper, but we have to put 33 weeks of training into them before we can put them on the road. And so this has worked very well that we've kept our trooper school and our training to try to keep our manpower up. And that is it for amended 14, and then I'll go back to the page before on 158 about the recommended changes for aviation. As you all know, the Commission for New Georgia recommended a complete overhaul of our aviation fleet because of aged aircraft. Currently, we're operating 2 UH-1 helicopters that are Vietnam-era helicopters that are over 50 years old. And what this proposal is in southwest Georgia that we establish an additional responsibility with our law enforcement responsibility and provide the possibility for EMS life flight coverage for southwest Georgia. If you look at the 14 counties in southwest Georgia, there is no private carrier that provides this capability. It's predominantly a rural agricultural area. So if you're a farmer and you have a combine accident or a grain elevator accident and you need to get to trauma care, there's really no way to get you to Jacksonville, to Savannah, to Macon, or to Atlanta, and there's no way to get you there quickly. And so what this is the initial part of state dollars to start this effort. And with that said, Mr. Chairman, if you'd like me to move into the reason why that's there and amended into 15, I'd be happy to.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
First of all, I applaud your efforts with this, and I'm very encouraged, but what about some of the trauma money?
As you know, the super speeder bill that was passed years ago.
While Colonel Hitchens was there, I remember.
Yes, sir.
Just saying.
Yes, sir. That was supposed to produce $20.3 million on an annual basis for trauma care. And when you talk about that trauma care, what you're talking about are those dollars to provide those hospitals the ability to provide that trauma care. So the correct answer to that question, sir, I don't know whether there's an additional amount of money that comes out of that pot to be able to do this.
Okay.
Because you guys are issuing the citations, the super speeder citations. I guess that's the connection.
Well, it never has generated as much money as was projected.
It hasn't, but I want to add this: although it was never written, it was agreed that whatever money came from that would go to trauma. Yes, and I think there have been times in the past few years where that has not coincided.
I'm glad we don't have the responsibility for that.
Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
You just do the work for it. You don't.
All right, I mean, there are not that many changes between your 14 and 15, so just let's do it all.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Moving on to the governor's recommendation for 15, starting on page 304, the first caveat is aviation. You will see under state general funds, number 1, provide funds for operating expenses for life flight helicopters, $2.1 million. Now, what this does is provide funds for 5 additional pilots, 5 paramedics and tactical flight officers, 2 mechanics, the related aviation expenses for maintenance on the helicopters, and a projected about 10,000 gallons of fuel.
You don't need an attorney for those helicopters, right?
No, sir, no attorneys are required. But I will say that their assistance in putting together a relationship and an MOU will be very helpful. I'd like that one to be a physician as well as a lawyer. Turning over to page 305, under field offices, the respective carry-ons from the amended 14, number 4 and number 5, provide the annualized expense of the 14 new troopers at Post 52 in Hart County, and then the extension of the Georgia Interoperability Network maintenance funding at $868,000. And then the last thing that I'd like to bring to your attention in 15 is under the Motor Carrier Compliance Division, and that's under other changes, number 4. And that's to transfer funds from the Department of Revenue to the Department of Public Safety for the administration of the Unified Carrier Registration Agreement, that you would support that. Last year, we passed a bill moving that function from the Department of Revenue to the Department of Public Safety. That is a win-win for our department. In 2006, when the federal government turned the administration of that over to the states, the decision was made to give it to the Department of Revenue. They collected $2.7 million that was supposed to come to us. They kept $1 million for administrative purposes, and they gave $1.7 to us. So this gives that administration of that to us and allows us to use that funding to hire specifically new officers because of the expansion of the port. If the port is expanded, and it will be, that will increase our commercial motor vehicle traffic from 48,000 commercial motor vehicles to 78,000 commercial motor vehicles a day. And so this funding, this additional funding coming to us, will allow us to hire those officers to have the proper compliance to make sure that the infrastructure is not adversely impacted. And with that, Mr. Chairman, that's fiscal year 15.
Okay. Chairman Willard.
Good afternoon, Colonel. Good to see you.
How are you, sir?
I'm fine. I'm looking at your Hart County, which is certainly a needed area. I know from the past there's been a practice of the local governments. What to say?
There are a lot of offenders up there, I think.
There what?
There are a lot of offenders up there.
Maybe. Maybe. But we've always had local governments participate in the construction of the posts.
Yes, sir. And
is that a practice past, or is
in this case, they will do the same. All of our facilities in the state are provided by local governments because when a trooper writes a citation, none of that comes to our agency. That goes into the local community. So the relationship, that's a close one to the local community, since so we're here to provide those services, that's what pays for that.
So yours is strictly operating expenses.
That's
in
correct,
both
sir.
categories.
That's correct.
For the new officers.
Yes, sir.
And do you have anything in your budget as far as a salary adjustment? Because the turnover problem you have is tremendous. We all know that.
When we get officers and we get them trained, the attrition is only about 5%. If you all remember the pay scale that you instituted for us 6 years ago, that won't forever solve our problem, but it helped us. It helped us tremendously.
Okay, so you're not having the big turnovers you used to have in
no, sir.
prior years.
Where we're seeing it now is with our radio operators and with our civilian waymaster program. And in the recommendations that are here, those additional amounts of money for field services, that's where we intend to use those specifically for our radio operators. We have about a 50% attrition with that group in the first year, so that's where we intend to target those funds.
Thank you. May I follow up, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Talk about the helicopter issue. That's the one that the governor addressed in his State of the State.
Yes, sir.
Comments about the expanding of that program. But I heard you describing the personnel you need, and you had mechanics. Do we not outsource mechanical work for our air fleet?
We do not. We do the majority of our maintenance at our facility in McCullum. We have 6 mechanics that we do the majority of our fleet maintenance. When it goes beyond their expertise, where they have to do specific things to turbine engines, then we do outsource those things. But the majority of that maintenance is done by our own folks.
Thank you.
Okay, we got lots of questions. Representative Hightower.
This may be a more appropriate question for our the Director of the Public Safety, but I've heard that we've had a lot of advancement in online training, and I was just curious how that was going, how it was it affecting the budget, or how that was being implemented?
Well, for us, it's been great. Whenever you can take what the Director has done in what is known as a blackboard fashion and take post-certified courses. I'll use for us one that's required, and that's the requirement for a refresher for a radar operation. Instead of having a class or going to a particular area, now an officer can go online and can take what's been produced and be able to watch that and get that required refresher training without having to travel and the expense for it. So that's just one example for us that it's an excellent excellent thing in training.
Okay, Representative Rogers.
First of all, Colonel, I'll say that the motor carrier compliance bill was a brilliant bill, I thought.
Yes, sir, it was. Thank you, sir.
I wonder who would have authored it.
You and I are both from the same area. We live in a rural area. One of the concerns that we've seen over the course of the last couple of years is the price of fuel, and putting troopers in a position of where they've really been, I hate to use the word stifled, but it's put them in a tough position. Has that been ironed out, and has that been addressed in these budgets?
If you remember, over the last couple of years, we specifically asked for additional funding for fuel, which y'all kindly gave to us. we look very closely at the fuel index. Last year it was $3.31 is what the projection was. And the projection was right on the money. That's what we used for our request. And so when we were restricted in the past to a fuel budget of about $419, now each trooper is at about $650. So that means more patrolling and more distance covered. The projection for next year, I believe, is $3.27. It's actually a little bit better. So as it stands now, we're good for fuel.
So you think that's adequate?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
All right, Representative Williams.
Good to see you, Colonel.
Good to see you, sir.
Question. I didn't see it in here, and I've been looking, and I might have just overlooked it. I know that some time ago, during the downturn particularly, at late night particularly, you literally have to call a trooper and wake a trooper up because you didn't have the personnel. And I really didn't know we had the smallest force in the nation with the 9th largest population. Somewhere that's out of Keto, but we'll go on from there. My question is, are you still in the position where we really are undermanned, or are you up to force? As you know, personally, and I'm not going to identify in what area, whether it's cities or counties, but very personally, I've found that when our troopers are on the road, they represent the state well. I go through too many places in Georgia where it's very obvious it's a source of revenue. Look at all these little towns, 6 miles from downtown, you got a cop out on the interstate. But that's not the question. Are you able now to properly, are you up to, can we do it around the clock?
Well, we can't do it around the clock, but what we do is take a look at the data of where our best time can be spent. For instance, here in Atlanta, we take a look at the commute times, where the most traffic is and where the most accidents are. And we schedule our personnel during those times so that the support is there when they're most needed.
Thank you. And just one final follow-up, please, Mr. Chairman. We're a state that talk about good, clean tourist dollars. Impressions of a state means everything. But a trooper who is trained stops someone. They usually understand. They know they were wrong. When Wild Bill Hickok stops them, they don't have nothing else to do with Georgia, and they hate the thought of driving through. Heard it all over the country. Thank you.
Let me ask you something. I assume that when you are saying that we have the lowest number of state officers, state patrol,
yes,
that's
sir,
per capita.
That's correct, sir.
Okay, so you don't have the figure of law enforcement officers per capita total.
I don't understand your question, sir.
County, city, county and everything. So per capita, Georgia doesn't have the lowest number of law enforcement officers per capita.
No, sir.
I just want to make sure.
And it's, I think the important thing to talk about in that instance is what those officers do. Municipal officers, sheriffs for the most part, are answering calls for service. What we do is we're involved specifically in traffic enforcement. So in the area of traffic enforcement, for those that do that across the nation, we have the lowest level of any other state.
Per capita?
Yes, sir.
All right, I have a couple of questions, Colonel. Number one, the motor carrier revenue.
Yes, sir.
All right. As I understand it, there was not a correlation that you actually got the function before you got the revenue. You had to do the work last year, but you didn't get, or not getting the revenue till this year. Is that right?
The additional amount. We have an MOU between us and the Department of Revenue that of the money that they collected on an annual basis, they gave us 1.7. So what the law did when we get the function, this allows us to collect all of it and use it for the purposes that it's intended to under federal law.
All right, so I guess my question is, because we're talking about only the 15 of it showing up, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. In the 14, as of right now, you're doing all the work and getting $1.7 million from the Department of Revenue.
Yes, sir.
Okay. My question is, if we've got an additional $1 million in revenue coming in next year to the department, what are we putting people on the road, or are we borrowing money to keep our head afloat till we get this extra money? What is that extra $1 million going for?
We're specifically using that to hire motor carrier compliance officers and targeting them on the coast because of the expansion of the port.
Okay, so we're going to increase service, in
Yes,
other
sir,
words,
we are.
and enforcement.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, my second question, and this is, I guess I want you to react. It's not actually a question, and I'm not asking you, and I'm not trying to pit the GBI and public safety against each other, but I do recall that there was a time in last year's budget that there were some positions that were being funded by federal grant dollars in the GBI, that once those federal grants went away, that money was not initially put into the budget to continue those positions in the GBI, the position being that you got these federal grants, you knew at some point they were going away. Why didn't you go find the money or reallocate so that you would not have to replace that money when they went away, because you know they were going away? And it seems that that same philosophy or approach would apply to the interoperability network. And my question is, why are we putting that in the budget? Why was that not same approach taken in this case?
Because the funds that were used were not grant funding to pay for that. It was asset forfeiture funds. And you've already heard testimony that that is not a reliable source of funds anymore. For the most part, our participation in that, particularly on federal asset forfeiture, is where we get predominantly those funds. What has happened with a federal government that opens a checking account and never balances it is they're keeping every last dime. So the transfer that we used to see is not what we see now. The troopers continue to do their job. They continue to participate in that forfeiture procedure, but that flow is only in one direction. It's not coming back to us the way it used to.
That was not grant money then. That was
No, sir.
forfeiture money, and
Yes,
they've
sir.
changed the rules on you.
Yes, sir. And what we've done is you've seen what we've asked for in FY14. We've asked for about $780,000, and it's increased a little bit in our request in 15 to about $860,000. The reason why the difference is we have gone and we've asked for grant funding so that some of the replacement things that are required, we've done that, so we try to reduce costs that way. So
Very
we
good.
are actively working, and particularly with Charlie Ingalls Tajima, to look for any grant funding to be able to reduce what we asked for.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Any other questions for the Department of Public Safety? I think we all thank you and congratulate you on a job well done. Y'all have dealt with less during some very hard times without complaint, and we appreciate your cooperation.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Or you could say upgrade.
All right, we're getting a little rowdy over here. All right, CJCC.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
And keep smiling. Thank you.
$29. All right, what page in the budget books are you?
Page 131.
All right, you have no changes in the 14 amended, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, tell us about your 15.
Okay. The budget lines in the governor's FY 2015 represent statewide changes, transfer of operations from another agency.
Wait a minute, what page in the budget book?
Oh, for 15, it's page 248.
Thank you.
And those changes are as follows. The statewide retirement system employer share fund is going to increase $13,835. The statewide 1% merit pay adjustment is going to be $5,022. Item 3 represents 5 positions to administer the sexual assault and domestic violence funding currently managed by GOSIF. This is a split between federal and state funds, with federal funds paying just under half of the staff and operating costs. These positions monitor the programs and certify domestic violence shelters are meeting state standards. They'll also process grant payments for the agencies.
Let me ask you a question, please, ma'am. These changes that are being made to your budget for 15, are they new funds, new programs, or are they just programs that have been transferred over to your department?
They've just been transferred over from GOSIF.
So none of this is really new money?
It's not new money.
Okay. Anyone have any questions about the program transfers or what these programs do? But we are not talking new money. So are there any questions? And then we'll just let her address those specific questions.
Question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been very interested in the alternative courts and also the juvenile changes we've made, of course. And your office oversees, first of all, talk about the alternative courts, drug courts. We had testimony earlier. Can you tell us, when you make these grants, are they being made for purpose of things like counseling, drug testing? What is the money that you receive and give under grants set up as categories for use by the local drug courts?
I actually have the supervisor who administers that program here. If you would allow, I'd like him to speak.
I think it'd be helpful because we're hearing some questions about personnel issues.
Thank you. First of all, the funds we administer.
Come over to the mic over here, please.
Come over here. Might be. They're recording.
Good afternoon. I'm Robert Thornton. I'm the director of our Grants and Policy Division at CJCC. We administer the funds that the Accountability Court Funding Committee oversee. That fund administer about $11.6 million for accountability courts throughout the state. Right. And we also oversee the funds that the Juvenile Justice Incentive Grant Funding Committee administer, which was $5 million in this past fiscal year. The grants that we administer do not support any state or county employee salaries, which would not include, they don't fund judges' salaries or defense attorneys' salaries. What they do fund are treatment providers for the most part, some case managers, and some other expenses that go into the operation of those drug courts. We fund about 101 courts throughout the state, from felony drug courts, DUI courts, mental health courts, juvenile drug courts, maybe a couple that I'm leaving out.
May I follow up on that, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
Does your department make any determination or trying to determine how much extra load this may carry for the local judicial officers, whether it be DAs, judges, their staff, et cetera, through the use of these funds and programs are set up for drug courts?
We did not undertake any study about what type of additional load that may.
Do you hear anything back from these courts about that issue?
I think with the drug courts, those start with the judges that really see a need for those courts. And from what we've seen, that it starts with 1 or 2 judges in those circuits, and they spend their additional time. It may be time that they're not necessarily paid for. And then they bring other partners to the table. I understand that with the district attorneys, I think the testimony that Mr. Spahus gave earlier was correct, that they were told to come through this process to seek additional funds. And then the Accountability Court Funding Committee, which actually oversees this grant program, they excluded those types of salaries from the application. So any salaries for county or state employees were not included and were not considered by the funding committee.
But there have been requests made, but it's been
not official requests through the application process. I think we've heard that it does, once Accountability Court is funded and is operational, it does require some extra hours that are put in from those that work in those courts and provide assistance to those courts.
If I may follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
The one last item is on the juvenile justice reform. $5 million we had last year, and additional $1 million from the federal grant. Are we going to be receiving a federal grant this coming year, or do you know?
From my understanding, there are 2 federal grants that support that program, and that has been administered by the Governor's Office of Children and Families. There's the Juvenile Accountability Block Grant and the Title II funds that are awarded to GOSIF.
Is that continuing?
The Juvenile Accountability Block Grant, from my understanding, is not in the FY15 federal budget process right now. It's zeroed out. The Title II grant funds, I believe, have received a slight increase. The funds that are being utilized right now, though, are prior federal fiscal year's funds. So I believe there are some federal funds available for this upcoming year.
Is that going to be funds that we can use for these local community grants, or is that for another purpose?
From my understanding, they could be used to supplement the state funds like they were last year. I'm not sure exactly how much is available because we're just now in the discussions with the Governor's Office of Children and Families about those programs and how we'll administer those if they are indeed transferred to our agency.
Right. So what we're increasing here is from the $5 million that we currently expended this past year for an additional sum above the $5 million to $6,250,000 total.
That's correct.
How is that determined as being the amount necessary?
I would defer. We do know that there are additional funds that are needed to support those programs.
Right.
We have
I don't think it's enough. That's what I'm getting to.
We have 21 grants that go across the state, which I believe support about 24 counties.
Yeah.
And then there are some additional grants that the Governor's Office of Children and Families administers. So to get statewide coverage, there would be some additional funds that would be needed.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, we funded 21 counties with the grant, and we're still waiting on the data to come in to see how those work and where else they might be. We might be able to place those.
I know, and I worked on the committee that dealt that thing, but of course the problem was we're looking at the most severe areas, the 21, 22 counties, but we realized the programs needed throughout the other jurisdictions, and I'm really wanting to see the state step up and perform the services through funding that's needed to keep this program alive and doing the work that it can do with the juvenile programs. That's what I'm hearing.
I think that one of the largest hurdles right now is just implementation.
What?
Implementation.
Implementation.
Just trying to get them up and running. It's been, since it's due, it's just trying to get that money in there, get the people in place, and get it spent. So I think once we have that process in place, that we'll be able to set up new courts.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you all.
Thank you.
GBI.
Except for the governor getting budget for his third year of the salary
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I have with me Connie Buck, who is the GBI fiscal officer. Governor entrusts me with a major budget, but in the Keenan household, I'm not allowed to keep the checkbook, so I have Connie Buck here to help me get through the finances of our agency. There are no good changes in the governor's recommendation for the FY14 amended. So with your permission, I will address the FY15 budget. The one thing I wanted to highlight, the governor's recommendation in the FY15 addressed the standard share increases for employment retirement system and the TeamWorks billing adjustment. But what I wanted to discuss was the governor's recommendation to put $2.63,641,000, and this is on page 247, by the way, to employ one medical examiner and one death investigator. Currently, the GBI operates one of the largest medical examiner systems in the United States. We provide autopsies, postmortem exams to 151 of the 159 counties. We do that with 14 board-certified forensic pathologists,
we have maxed out our ability to perform autopsies, and with the increased workload based on the state's population and other factors, we've asked the governor and asking you to give us the funding to employ a 15th pathologist and a death investigator to support that pathologist.
Have you identified those people?
Sir?
Have you identified those people?
We have not identified those people.
Okay.
We will begin the recruitment for the 15th doctor as soon as we see that the funding is available.
Thank you for doing that.
We do not hire when we don't have the money on the table.
What is the difference between forensic pathologist and just a regular pathologist? Is that a specialized area?
The forensic pathologist is a highly specialized area. There are approximately 400 board-certified forensic pathologists in the United States. These are doctors who have gone through medical school. They are regular doctors. They have gone through an additional 2 years of forensic pathology training, and then they are board certified. Very highly specialized group of men and women. It takes us on an average a year to recruit a forensic pathologist to come to us. We are fortunate in that Georgia has an excellent reputation throughout the forensic community for supporting the medical examiner's offices. We also have excellent facilities here in the state, so that is why we're able to attract the doctors. We do over 3,000 autopsies a year, total of 4,600 autopsies plus medical exams, postmortem exams. If you come visit me in my office, you will see hearse delivering customers to our morgue in headquarters.
Do they complain?
No, and that is one of the reasons that the medical examiners say they like their work. Their patients don't complain. They do not have to carry on a conversation while they're working unless they're talking to a cohort.
All right, any questions?
So you don't need a good bedside manner.
No, sir, you do not need that.
All right, guys.
Sorry.
All right. If there are no questions, I would point out that no, we don't take them from the gallery. I would point out that we made a commitment to the state patrol, to the GBI, and through other committees to the game wardens, that over a 3-year period of time that we would bring their pay parity up to the that of the state patrol. There is no money in this budget for the 15 budget for that last step of that 3-year process. So I would just remind everybody, even though this budget looks a little simple, that we might have another item we need to address when we get into the 15. Because it's not there, is it?
No, sir.
Okay.
Not in the governor's recommendation.
Did you request it from the governor?
No, sir. There's not a mechanism to request that.
You don't meet with the governor before he makes his budget?
I meet with the Office of Planning and Budget.
Well.
And they tell me what the governor's recommendation is.
Aren't you glad you got so many friends supporting y'all, huh?
Sir, for the final year for the pay parity for the agents is $1.3 million, and the scientists is $1.9 million.
All right, that's salary and benefits.
That is salary and benefits, and it's structured through their years of service, their rank, their levels of training.
So in other words, to do the 3rd year, we're looking at $3.2 million.
3.7 million.
Thought you said 1.3 and 1.9.
That's why I don't not allowed out to keep the checkbook, sir. Which is it?
It's 1.8 for the agents.
Okay.
And 1.9 for the
1.9. Okay. Okay. All right. Any questions? Thank you, sir. And we are 2 minutes behind schedule. We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Good job, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir.
Very good. Yeah.
Now. Yeah, now.
A little bit of confusion there. Quite honest with you.
Tell you where we going? To the fourth floor conference room, White House Budget Office.